Hello, vintage computer friends. Well, the year 2022 is coming to an end and it's time to wrap up my channel for this year. So maybe with one final video, one final contribution. But before I give you a brief demo of my newest member to my vintage computer collection, the Schneider Euro PC, right, and a little discovery I made regarding its graphics capabilities, I would like to mention some of the vintage computing highlights of 2022, some of my personal highlights, right? So one was that I participated in the Retro Challenge last year, right? The Retro Challenge 2021-10. And I contributed with my retro authentic re-implementation of my Microtronic hardware emulator, right, which is basically an 80 mega 328p based re-implementation of the 1981 Bush Microtronic educational computer system, right? And so I made a series of videos about this design and how to actually extend the CPU model, the instruction set, and the emulator such that you can turn this into a MIDI drum module using ZetaShop's X2 GS MIDI synthesizer, right? And I made a number of videos where I basically showed the firmware extensions and experiments and programs with that, right? And it took them like 11 months basically to finally decide on the winners, but I'm happy to announce that I was one of the winners of last year's Retro Challenge, right? So I got this wonderful mousepad as a prize, right? And I got this, I think, in October, so this year, 2022. So this was basically one of my 2022 highlights, even though the Retro Challenge already was last year. And my second highlight is really this Schneider Euro PC, right? Because it requires quite an extensive and I would say very challenging number of repairs. So this was definitely my most challenging repair of a vintage machine that I had so far, right? So among other things, it required, of course, replacing the real-time clock battery, right? And some of the battery, of course, the acid leaked onto the main board, damaged parts of it in the real-time clock area, right? Requiring bodge wires and, you know, some general cleanup. But overall, the motherboard, the circuit board wasn't in a too bad condition, right? So electrically, the motherboard and the traces were still largely fine, right? Only 4 or 5 bodge wires. But what surprised me was the amount of defect, non-functional chips in this machine, right? So I had to replace 4 or actually 5 47LS something chips, right? Glue logic chips. Like bus drivers and things like that, right? And also the keyboard controller was defect, right? So I actually needed to reprogram a 68705 U3 keyboard controller from Motorola, right? So this is actually an EEPROM, so I have a tape here to protect the EEPROM, right? This is one of my reprogrammed ones, and that required me to construct basically an 68705 programmer, right? This is a Motorola reference design basically, right? On the left and on the right. So rather than using another EEPROM to store the firmware, right, for the keyboard controller to be programmed into the Motorola microcontroller, it uses an Arduino basically, right, to store the firmware and upload the firmware from the Arduino into the Motorola 68705 microcontroller. And so this design was actually the idea of using an Arduino rather than an EEPROM like in the Motorola reference design for this programming board, right, was from a member on the German Vintage Computer Forum, right? The Verein zum Erhalt klassischer Computer, right? Or you find that under classiccomputing.org or classiccomputing.de. There is a section on the Schneider Euro PC, and so this guy has basically rescued, read out the ROM, the firmware of the Schneider Euro PC microcontroller, keyboard controller, right, and put it into an Arduino. So, and then one could just use the Motorola reference design for the programming device and you know, reprogram it. So after that, basically the machine was working again, right, but it was completely dead when it arrived. So, and it took about 40 hours of repairs and diagnosis in order to get it working. So power supply, of course, I also didn't have, right, but you can just use one of these generic Meanwell power supplies, right? This is an RT65B, and this supplies the required 5 volts, 12 volts, and minus 12 volts, right? And it goes over a DIN cable. So this one is a very nice Meanwell in a acrylic case, which I acquired years ago from Lotarec, right? Who sold it as a universal power supply, and I never had a use for it, right? Partially due to these weird, very nice, but weird connectors, right? He soldered to that at the end, right? So I directly soldered my cables to the Meanwell output lines, basically, right? So of course you don't need that acrylic case, but I was happy, you know, to have found that I still have it around, never used it, and I forgot about it, right? I got it like 4 or 5 years ago, and finally I had a use case for it, so I was very happy for this. So, right, so this is my re-engineered Schneider Euro PC power supply, right? And also, of course, I didn't have the original monitor, so it came with a CGA monitor for color graphics, or with a monochrome Hercules monitor, right? So in my case, I just used a CGA to SCART adapter. You can get that one from Zerda shop, right? And that does a good job of converting CGA video, right? The standard CGA video to SCART RGB, and then it goes into my Sony Trinitron monitor. So how about we fire it up, right? So there you go. And you hear my Euro PC coming alive now. We are getting an image, right? And so yeah, it's a PC XT, a PC IBM XT clone, right? So it was released in 1988 by the German company Schneider Rundfunkwerke AG, right? So here we are in the BIOS, and I mean, it's a pretty standard machine, right? It has a an 8088 CPU, of course, because it's an XT machine, but it does not have an Intel 8088, but a Siemens 8088. And the special thing about this Siemens CPU is that you can actually clock it quite a bit faster than a standard Intel 8088. It gets clocked up to 9.54 megahertz. So I'm here in the BIOS, and you can see that I can change the CPU frequency from 4.77, the standard XT frequency, over 7.15 up to 9.54 megahertz, right? So the machine is actually quite a bit faster than a standard IBM PC XT, and quite snappy actually. And then, I mean, it has 512 kilobytes of RAM internal, right? So Schneider also released a Euro PC 2 like 2 years or 1 year later, right? And this one was released in 1988, but I think in 1989 or so they released the Euro PC 2, which then had 640 kilobytes of RAM, right? But this only has 512. And even later they released an 286 based AT clone, right? But I think overall they made like 3 or 4 PC clones before they finally also got bankrupt, right? And the company Schneider is, of course, well known, or was well known in Germany for basically being the German analog of Amstrad in England, right, in the UK, basically selling consumer low-end stereo and TVs and things like that. And they were also the main distributor starting in 1985 for Amstrad's line of color personal computers, right? The CPC 464 Z80 based home computer was distributed by Schneider in Germany starting in 1985, which was actually my first computer. So I'm kind of attached to Amstrad machines as well as to Schneider machines. But later on they parted with Amstrad and they designed their own machines, right? And then 1988 was really the first, this machine was the first machine they designed themselves without Amstrad, right? And yeah. the Schneider Euro PC. So I'm kind of attached to Schneider as well as Amstrad, so, and I'm happy to have this machine. So the discovery I made about this machine is that it actually has more than standard CGA graphics, which is of course 320 by 200 pixels at 4 colors, right? This machine actually supports something which is called Plantronics CGA mode, an extended CGA, which has 16 colors at 320 by 200 pixels, right? And I discovered this because I downloaded the 8-Bit Guys, I purchased the 8-Bit Guys Planet X3 game, which is of course an excellent game to test, you know, because it supports all these different graphics modes and sound cards as well. So a great test case for this machine, right? So how about yeah, and what else can I tell you about this machine? So yeah, as I said, it had extensive damage, right? It required like 40 hours of diagnosis and repair. And I also then attached a sound card to the parallel port, right? It has a parallel printer port. There's an OPL3LPT sound card from Zelda shop connected to it. So it has a parallel printer port, it has a serial port, the COM port, right? Then it has a combined mouse joystick port. The joystick is actually digital, not analog, right? I don't have the mouse nor the joystick, and the joystick is also non-standard. It has one internal 8-bit ISA card slot, and that you can of course use to put in a, you know, an even better graphics card, for example, an 8-bit VGA card, right? I think VGA started basically 1 or 2 years after the release of this machine in 89 or so. VGA basically took over the PC world, but before that it was Hercules and CGA and these extended CGA modes, right? Like Plantronics. And of course it has a real-time clock, and you could attach a hard disk, right, an external hard disk. The HD20 from Schneider was a 20 megabyte hard disk. Would be sitting here in an external enclosure connected to a cable, right? And the hard disk geometry is wired, hardwired into the BIOS actually, right? So I won't be able to get one of those, obviously, they are very rare, right? But what I want to get is a CF card, like CF card based 8-bit ISA hard disk card, right, which I can put in the 8-bit ISA slot here, and then I would also have a hard disk, a CF card based or SD card based hard disk. So that's the thing which I'm going to acquire soon. And in the meantime, you know, I have the 3.5 inch 720 kilobytes floppy disk, right? So how about we fire up the machine, right? First we gotta put in our DOS 3.3, exit the BIOS, and press F1 to boot from disk. And once we have MS-DOS 3.3 up and running, we can play disk jockey and put in the Planet X3 disk, right, from the 8-bit guy. And then I'm going to demonstrate PX3, Planet X3. Then I'm going to demonstrate the extended CGA graphics mode with 16 colors. So, Planet X3 setup menu shows up, right, and here we are being asked to select the video mode, right? So what I'm going to select is now not the standard CGA 320 by 204 color mode, number 1, right, but number 6, which is Plantronics 320 by 200 at 16 colors. So number 6 here, and then also we now choose the better sound, which is OPL3LPT, and I have an OPL3LPT connected, but they are compatible, and it's connected to LP3 LPT3 at 3BC address, right? So let's fire up the game, and you can already tell that the sound is quite a bit better, right? And also we have obviously more than 4 colors, right? So this is not CGA 4 color, but a very colorful 16-bit 16 color screen, right? And I have no idea how to play this game, so I just got it. I apologize for making a fool out of myself, right? I'm just showing it as a graphics demo here, basically. You can tell that the performance it's quite snappy and the scrolling is fast due to the fast 9.54 MHz CPU, right? And definitely much nicer graphics than standard CGA with 4 colors, right? This magenta, bluish, white, magenta 4-color palette. Yeah, very good demo, this game, for the capabilities of the Euro PC. And I would say even this makes it a highly collectible and desirable machine, right? Similar to the Tandy 1000 machines, which also supported 16 colors, right? Alright, so in comparison I would still like to show you the standard CGA graphics mode. So let's exit this. And start the game again. This time in standard CGA mode. So we are selecting the one here and also the PC speaker. So it's a nice contrast. Yeah, I would say that's a much more basic experience. But also pretty fast, so again the fast CPU makes it actually difficult to maneuver here. So we can always go into the BIOS, right, and change the CPU frequency at runtime. So let's put it into standard 4.77 MHz mode, right? Oh, okay, but then the machine actually needs to reboot, so we lost the game. Alright guys, thanks for watching. So much for wrapping up the retro year 2022 and my latest acquisition, the very beautiful, very nice Schneider Euro PC. Very glad that I got it and that I was able to fix it, right? So this is really the repair which I'm most proud of all the repairs I've done so far. And I had some quite challenging ones before, right? For example, the BBC Micro, but this was definitely the most challenging one and definitely one of my highlights for the retro computing year 2022. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next year.